Hello and welcome to the Grand Canyon, a legacy for every one of us Americans. Today's episode is the story of the peoples of the Southwest, the earliest Americans. You might remember in episode 10 on the frontier, we talked about Beringia and how Asian peoples came across the land bridge during the Ice Age and then came down through the spine of North America about 13,000 years ago or so. Archaeologists have discovered from spear points, large spear points embedded in the ribs of mammoths or mastodons, that peoples had existed here 11,000 years ago. Just east a bit of the Grand Canyon here, the Pueblo people flourished. They developed a trading system by building a huge network of roads which challenged the Romans in their engineering capabilities. And they traded turquoise all over the Southwest and down into Mexico as well. And so we're going to confine ourselves to the more ancient peoples. The Pueblo peoples that were out around the four corners of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. And the Sinagua peoples are a bit farther south. And those are the peoples who we consider the cliff dwellers. And after we leave here at the Grand Canyon, we're going to take a trip down to some of those places and some of those ruins, particularly to Montezuma's castle, which is a magnificent structure from about 1,000 years ago or so. Then after we're finished there, we're going to continue farther south down to the area where the Hohokam thrived. Now the Hohokam were magnificent engineers. They built hundreds and hundreds of miles of irrigation canals off the Salt River, which is south of Phoenix. And indeed, the city of Phoenix is the legacy left by these canals and by these ancient Native American peoples. And we'll see you down at Montezuma's castle. I hope you enjoyed your visit to the Grand Canyon. Right now we are farther south in Arizona, a little bit south of Sedona, at a place called Montezuma's Castle. Even though Montezuma was never here and it's not a castle at all, it's on the center of the trade routes that extended all the way up to the four corners of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, all the way down into Mesoamerica, down where Mexico City is now, where the Aztecs were living back then. We're talking over 1,000 years ago. And the Puebloan people are considered ancestors of the Hopi and the Zuni peoples. Now down here we're a little bit farther south. We're south of Flagstaff and we're south of Sedona in the Verde Valley. And that river overflowed at the monsoon season, and there's Beaver Creek that comes right past here, very close to the castle here, so that they had an ample water supply, and that when the banks of the Verde River overflowed in the monsoon season, it inundated the land so that they couldn't build their villages on the ground because they were in a floodplain. And so they went up on the cliff side where they had that recess in the cliff that provided them with, it was dry, it was cool, it was protected from the sun, and it also protected them from their enemies because they accessed that with removable ladders. So this was a perfect place for a permanent settlement. That building up there is a 5-story, basically apartment complex that held between 30 and 50 people. And there was another one just down the mountainside a little bit. What's left of that is only the foundational ruins. That was even larger. And the people here were called the Sinagua people, which is a combination of Spanish words for a place without water. And even though there's a water supply, that's the name that apparently stuck. So they never call themselves Sinagua, but that's a more recent appellation that has been given to the folks who lived here 1,000 or more years ago. The earliest habitations here were on the ground, and they learned pretty quickly that that was not a really great idea, so they mimicked the Puebloan people, or the Anasazi people, up in the north and the east to build into the recesses of cliffs. And they also learned from the Hohokam people to the south how to dig irrigation canals to have permanent irrigation and therefore permanent farming. The women did the farming. There wasn't that much farming here because game still was abundant here. And so their food supply was primarily game, with opportunistic vegetation providing a supplement to their diets. Now, this place endured from about 700 AD till about 1425, and then all archaeological record of the Sinagua disappeared. And so the peoples moved elsewhere. Now, whether that was from some sort of climate influence where they experienced drought, or whether it was that more warlike tribes moved into the area and made things a little bit too challenging for people to stay here, nobody knows exactly why they left. The Spaniards didn't get here till in the mid-1500s. So when you look up here and see how they adapted, this is one of the great examples of how people can adapt to even the harshest and most hostile conditions. So these people, in order to build this, the engineering skills, the courage, the industry, all the virtues that we admire are reflected right here of these ancient peoples, these prehistoric, pre-Columbian peoples who developed and not only survived but prospered and managed to trade the things that they produced, primarily cotton and some copper and some wicker baskets. They were in the middle of a trade route right here that went as far south as the Valley of Mexico, all the way down around Mexico City, and all the way up into the Four Corners section at the very end of the Colorado Plateau, and even out to the Gulf of California, because seashells were traded as well for ornamentation, for jewelry. And so then our next stop is going to be down to the settlement of the Hohokam down at the Salt River south of Phoenix. Now, there should be some credit given to President Teddy Roosevelt, who in 1908 transformed the Grand Canyon into a national monument to preserve it. And 2 years earlier, he signed a presidential proclamation rendering this structure, this Montezuma's castle, as a national monument as well, to preserve it for all generations to come. So if you want to take a look at our other episode on Teddy Roosevelt and In Their Own Words, please do so. So that's our episode for today from right here, and we'll continue up as we head farther south down into the Phoenix area, just below Phoenix, to explore the people who are now known as the Hohokam. We are now south of Phoenix, Arizona, at an archaeological dig of a Hohokam community. This is called Pueblo Grande, which was probably the largest community in this area and the seat of the irrigation system that was established by the Hohokam. Now, the word Hohokam was not a word that would be used by the people themselves. It's a Pima term for ancestor or people who are no longer here, not to be confused with Hohokus, New Jersey. The Hohokam were geniuses of engineering of irrigation canals, and they developed a system off of the Salt River of canals aggregating over 1,000 miles. Some of the canals were 30 feet wide and 15 feet deep, and all of them were dug with stone implements. It was human labor, backbreaking labor, and stone tools. So it gives you an idea of the character of these people. The Hohokam relied upon agriculture for their survival because game here is very, very scarce. They had three main crops that enabled them not just to thrive, but to become very robust and healthy people. The three crops were maize, corn, squash, and beans. It turns out that the chemicals lacking in maize to produce protein can be found in the squash and beans, so that combined together, that diet was a very healthy and wholesome diet for the Hohokam. Also, the corn crops grew straight up. The beans clung as a climbing crop up on the corn stalks, and the squash provided ground cover both to preserve moisture and to suppress weed growth. So there was a symbiotic relationship among the three crops, not only for nutritional purposes, but for agricultural purposes as well. The Hohokam were so good at their irrigated system of agriculture that they were able to trade all over the American Southwest down to Mesoamerica, all the way down into the area of around Mexico City, and perhaps even farther down towards Guatemala, and all the way up towards the Colorado and Utah areas where the Puebloan peoples lived, all the way out to the Gulf of California, and some say even out to the Pacific, and all the way east almost to the Rio Grande. Now, they disappeared from the records at around 1450 AD, and nobody knows why they disappeared. But the Pima people claim them as their ancestral folk, and we as Americans can also claim them. These are people who were problem solvers, people who did not let adversity or obstacles stand in their way, not just simply to survive, but to prosper and to prevail over these incredibly harsh conditions. Right now it's 113 degrees here as I stand in the late afternoon in the summertime in Phoenix. And you can imagine these folks had to prevail under these conditions as well. And they built their villages basically with pods, family pods, that had mud and stone, we call them huts, I guess, that they were dug out below the surface a couple of feet down so that they would be on the cool earth and surrounded by stone and clay to keep out the heat of the day. And they were in circular formation for each family, surrounding a central area of a central mound for ceremonial and religious purposes, and a ball court that was also used for religious and for sporting purposes as well. These irrigation systems were able to support a population between 30 and 50,000 people right here in the arid desert. It is our privilege as Americans to include the story of the Hohokam, the story of the Sinagua and of the Puebloan peoples into the magnificent story of America. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, would you please like us on YouTube, share us with your family and your friends and your children and your grandchildren. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching. God bless you.